Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react.
Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Sean, I understand you've got a confession for us?
I do. I think the world should know because it's weighing really heavy on my heart. I've abandoned my own principles here.
Oh my gosh.
I shared quite a few stories of air travel, right? Whether it be on a recording or my social media or whatever. And I think most people know, if not, a reminder, I hate Delta Airlines.
Really?
For the record.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, just to be clear.
Good. I'm glad you clarified.
Don't want any confusion. The problem, though, is I struggle with that hatred because every flight has been fine on the plane. The air staff is great, or whatever you might call them. The crew is fine.
Yeah.
It's always been a negative experience at the airport. And it's different airports. Sacramento maybe has been fine. Raleigh was a show. And some others. It was just, Salt Lake City was worse. It's just, the airport staff has always been the frustrating element for me when it comes to that particular airline.
Yeah, and the fact that it's bunch of different airports, it wasn't just one or two people, right?
No,
it's something systemic.
Multiple incidents at different times, different airports. Okay.
Right.
Also, I struggle with it because I like their CEO, Ed Bastian. I read some of his material. I've heard him in interviews. I think he's probably a good person. But, man, the ground staff has been disappointing for me. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, got a big trip this year, flying international.
Right.
And I struggled trying to find an airline. I wanted to fly direct, and there was so many different nuances and elements that I was trying to figure out. Unfortunately for me, the best option was a Delta flight out of San Francisco, there and back. And I really wrestled with, do I click this or not? And I ended up doing it, and it wasn't the cheapest flight, so it wasn't a matter of pricing. It was just all the different elements and complexities that go into flying internationally, and the drive to San Francisco and so on.
Right.
It just seemed to be the best option. So I put my ego aside for a minute, and I ended up giving Delta way more money than I ever want to.
Hopefully the international, I don't know, maybe it's different,
Maybe.
Right? Maybe it's a different set of training or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of my frustration has been so incredibly petty on the behalf of the desk agents or gate agents. So I'm hopeful that maybe people that deal with the international flights, maybe that small petty stuff isn't even on their radar. But only time will tell, and I'm confident I will give you a report. Well, it's going to be season 12 because my flight is over our summer break.
So wait, Sean, before we move on, can you give us an example? You said it was petty stuff.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff?
Sure. So I'll talk about the most recent because that's the one I remember the most. It was a few months ago. I had flown, a while back, a couple years ago, with my walker. And you've flown Delta. In fact, you have a tag. They give you a permanent tag to attach to your wheelchair, right? You have one or you've seen them?
Yeah.
So it's not a sticker. It's a hard plastic almost like a card that's designed to be permanent for that device.
Right, which is kind of annoying. Or I don't know. What do you think of it? I don't like that.
I thought it was kind of cool. So I don't know. So anyway, somebody gave me one for my walker. Mm-hmm. And apparently that's not normal. Those kind of identifying placards or cards are only meant for quote unquote permanent devices.
Oh.
But I thought it was fine. So the guy gave it to me and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I hung on to it for a while. Had it in my car thinking, okay, I don't fly Delta a lot, but chances are I might again, so I'll keep it. So anyway, I took a Delta flight a few months ago. Somebody else booked and paid for it. So that's the only time I'm willing to fly Delta, right? Until recently. So I find that card and I attach it to my walker and I fly to my destination, no problem. Well, on my return to Sacramento from Boston, the gate agent saw my walker and saw that permanent card, and she was like, where'd you get that? I'm like, I don't know, the last airport I was at? I don't remember. She goes, well, you're not allowed to have that.
Oh,
that's only for wheelchairs. That's only for... And she was like... aggressive right away. It almost felt like she was a teacher and I was a third grader and I just broke the worst rule in the book.
The golden rule.
So it was, everything about it was off-putting. You know, she could have easily said, oh, that's interesting. You know, we typically only do those for wheelchairs or blah, blah, blah. But no, she came right out the gate saying, I'm wrong. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't steal it, and I didn't ask for it. Somebody gave it to me. So I don't know what you want to do. She was like, well, you're not allowed to blah, blah, blah. So anyway, she escorts me down the gate, and she's pushing somebody else in a wheelchair, and I'm pushing my walker. And she continues to talk about my inappropriate card to the other passengers that she's pushing in a wheelchair. Gosh. She's like, yeah, that, you know, he has a card, he shouldn't have one. That's only for people like you. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And this lady is probably no less than 55 years old, right? It's obvious that she's having a bad day.
Right.
So we get down to the gate, and I forget the exchange, but I'm like, at some point, I'm like, Miss, I am so sorry this bothers you. I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I'm not in charge. You guys gave it to me. Like, you do whatever you want. I just want to get on that plane.
And cut it off. Yeah.
So she was like, well, tell me again where you got it. And I'm like, I forget. I don't know the airport. And she goes, no, I know the airport. I heard you the first time. And I'm like, then why'd you ask? And she walked away, and I got on the plane. And not 5 minutes later, a different gate, ground agent came onto the plane and found me and handed me my end of a paper sticker.
Okay.
While my walker was sitting at the gate for the gate check area, they removed the plastic card and they attached a sticker. And the lady came on and handed me a sticker. And I'm sitting there in my seat saying, you guys went through all this trouble to take the card. Like, this is so petty to me. But I'm like, I'm flying home.
Wow. Incredible. Yeah. Well, Sean, I'm sorry you had to sacrifice your principles. And we're really looking forward to hearing about your experience on Delta this summer, because I know we will hear about it for sure.
We'll see what happens. Kyle, for this newsworthy, it's a actual headline, a legit story that somebody forwarded to me. Newsworthy from CNN. Headline: Here's what the Starbucks of the future looks like. Subtitle: Starbucks has opened its first cafe designed to give customers with disabilities a more accessible store experience. The company announced this in a news release early February, maybe I think the second week, I forget the date. But a friend and a listener had forwarded me the message, and I enjoyed the article. Basically, Starbucks is moving toward being a little more aware in future new store developments and designs. They're doing things with the lighting that are, people with sensory sensitivities can, manage better. They've got registers and payment kiosks that are lower, so if you're using a wheelchair, you can reach them better. Better, clear pathways. So if you are in a wheelchair, you can navigate through the front door and all the way to the counter to pay for your drink and pick up your drink. And all these little details that to most people, they won't even notice. Able-bodied people. But to people like you and I and others with disabilities, it's going to make a massive difference. So, Jen, thank you for forwarding me this article. We will link the article in our show notes. We encourage you to check it out. And of course, as you know me, I encourage you to drink Starbucks. That's today's newsworthy.
Sean, as you know, one of our friends was dying of a rare disease, and he saved his own life with a repurposed drug that he himself discovered. Now he wants to do that same thing over and over for other diseases. We've had him on before, but now he's got a new, exciting initiative. Folks, enjoy our conversation with David Fajgenbaum. David, we're really excited to have you. Welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Kyle, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you guys.
So, first of all, we see you on video here. Is that Philly behind you? Are you in University City? Where are you at?
That's right. I'm University City. So let's see. If you look back here, this is Market Street and then going into Center City.
Oh, nice. Beautiful. And we see all the writing on your window as well. And I've seen that I don't know, the New York Times or something where you're writing on the window in a picture. What is all that stuff?
Well, so first off, we've run out of whiteboards here in our center. So so when you run out of whiteboards, what's the next best thing? Windows. Glass. And the one thing I will say, the problem with writing on windows is that every night as it gets dark, you can no longer see what you've written in your windows. And so there's this race against time. You guys get this sense. It's race against time. Can I write and can I see in the window before it gets dark? And then it's dark and that's all right. Tomorrow we'll get back to work. Yeah. And so it's this constant fight where, we're trying to figure out Castleman disease. And actually some of the stuff behind me actually isn't Castleman disease because as you know, Kyle and Sean, we've begun to expand our scope even beyond Castleman's.
Yeah. And we're going to get into all that. We want to hear, first of all, we know that you have two little kids now. Can you tell us about your kids?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a 5-year-old girl, Amelia, who's the sweetest, happiest little girl in the whole world. And I've got a 2-year-old boy who's a bit grumpy. I can't say he's the happiest guy around, but he's a sweet, sometimes grumpy boy. Yeah. And we are so lucky. We've got 2 awesome kids.
Wonderful. All right, so the basis for our conversation, I think, is your rare disease story. And we've heard it before on the podcast, but I think it would be good to give our listeners a little intro. If we could get the condensed version to kind of lay the foundation for the episode.
Sure, I'd love to. So I guess it all goes back to my third year of medical school. I wanted to become an oncologist. And remember, my mom, she had passed away a few years before when I was an undergrad. And that's really what made me want to go into medicine in the first place. And I was well on my way. And then out of nowhere, I got really, really sick and spent many months in the ICU. I even had my last rites read to me, as both of you know, because my doctors didn't think I'd survive. In fact, they were certain that I wasn't going to survive. But I got a lot of chemotherapy, and I eventually got a diagnosis of idiopathic multicenter Castleman disease, where basically your immune system attacks your vital organs for an unknown cause. And between the diagnosis and then a lot of chemotherapy, I was able to get into remission, but I kept relapsing. And by the time I had my fourth flare of this disease, I sort of was in this mindset of realizing that I couldn't just hope for someone somewhere to figure out a treatment for me. I was lucky. I was a third year med student. So I was like, if I'm going to have any chance of survival, maybe I could get involved in the fight. And so I started an organization called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. And then I started doing lab work to try to find a drug that could maybe help me. And, I thought it was really unlikely that I was going to find anything that could help me. But I knew that it was like, my only chance I had. And so I ended up discovering a drug that's been around for many, many years. It was approved for kidney transplantation. It's called sirolimus. And I thought it might work based on the experiments I was doing. But again, I still thought it might work. I wasn't certain by any means, right? Just sort of like, I really hope it works. Yeah. Maybe there's a 10% chance. But I started taking it, and actually last month, January of 2024, marked 10 years that I've been in remission on this drug.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a dream, right, guys? It's like, I never could have imagined 10 years ago that this drug was going to work. And during that time, as you shared, I was able to get married to Caitlin, and we have these two amazing kids. And importantly, this drug's been able to be given to patients all over the world. And maybe just as importantly as that, it really opened my eyes up to the power of the drugs that are sitting on the pharmacy shelf. So this drug, it was approved for organ transplantation. It was helping people all over the world that were getting organ transplants, but no one knew it could work for Castleman disease. So people were suffering from Castleman's while there was this treatment all along just sitting there for another disease, and no one knew it could be useful for our disease. And so this is just made me a man on fire for these last 10 years to say, how can we make sure that no one suffers if there's a treatment that's, just sitting there for them?
So how does that happen? What do you search for? What do you look at? What do you find out when you're on your search for this drug that ended up being sirolimus?
Yeah, so for me, it was in Castleman's, your immune system goes berserk. It's like, okay, if the immune system goes berserk, let's try to figure out what's happening in the process of it going berserk. And so let's start collecting blood samples. So I started collecting and storing blood samples every couple of weeks for almost a whole year leading up to my last relapse. And so after I survived the relapse, thanks to a bunch of chemo, I went back to the lab and I thawed all these samples, and they were blood samples of my immune cells, your white blood cells in your circulation. And so I ran tests called flow cytometry, and then I ran something called proteomics. And proteomics is where you measure, at the time, it was about 1,000 different molecules in your blood. And basically I could say, when I was healthy, this was the level of all these different things, cytokines, chemokines, proteins. Then when I was sick, these were the levels of these things. And you do something called pathway analyses, where you basically say, among the things that are up when I'm sick versus when I'm healthy, are they part of certain biological processes? Are all the things that are up part of one thing or another thing? Mm-hmm. And so we did that test, and it turned out that among the things that were up, there were tons of things that were part of this one. It's called a pathway or a communication line called mTOR. And for us, that was super exciting because there's drugs that inhibit mTOR. So I was like, okay, if mTOR is activated when I'm sick, maybe if we deactivated it or inhibited it, maybe I would stay healthy. And again, it's really that simple, right? It's not there wasn't any, these equations look very complicated, but at the end of the day, they're mTOR too high, make it low, right? It's so my proteomics said mTOR too high, and then it's all right, sirolimus takes it down. And that and I obviously I did a few more experiments as well on my lymph node too that sort of confirmed that hypothesis. But that's really how simple and how close all of us are to potentially a treatment that can be helpful for us.
So what I understand is that you've taken that idea and said, all right, how can we apply it to all human diseases? It's so talk about that a little bit.
Sure. It's the most crazy idea ever, right? It's like, okay, we found a treatment for me, and we've done this another about 10 times for Castleman's, where we found other drugs could be used in new ways. Now we think we can do this for all diseases. It's just crazy and ambitious and audacious, but mostly crazy. But what's makes this a little bit less crazy is that what's also happened over the last 10 years is that artificial intelligence has advanced so much. The things I described me doing by myself in the lab, that can now be done at scale, not by me, but by artificial intelligence algorithms across all drugs and all diseases. And so, because technology has advanced at the pace it has, what we're talking about with this organization, it's called EveryCure, is that we believe that every FDA-approved drug should be used for every disease it can possibly treat. And now that doesn't mean that we believe that every disease out there, there's a drug waiting to treat it, but it's that we believe that every drug out there should be used for every disease possible, because I think that we just fundamentally believe that people shouldn't suffer if there's a drug that can help them. There's many diseases, and you all know Friedreich's ataxia very well, and there's others, ALS, where the medical community has put a lot of effort and time into drug development and hasn't had the fruit of that labor that maybe we've all wanted. And maybe there is, or maybe there isn't a drug that's sitting on the pharmacy shelf, but we believe that every drug that is approved should be used to help every patient possible. And so the way we do that is we start out with what's called a biomedical knowledge graph. It's basically a database of everything the world knows. It's like the world's biomedical knowledge, every drug, every gene, every protein, every pathway, every disease, it's all in this basically two-dimensional network. And the key thing about it is it represents all the connections between things. So whereas a typical database might be a bunch of things like proteins or genes and then a value, a number next to it, that's not what this database is. This is a database of the connections that already exist. So we know that interleukin-6 is important to Castleman disease. And we know that siltuximab inhibits interleukin-6. So now siltuximab is connected to Castleman disease through this intermediary. But imagine it's all about the connections across all of medicine and everything we know. So you start out with this graph that shows all the connections between everything that you know. And then we apply an artificial intelligence algorithm on top of it. And we say, okay, AI algorithm, look at the patterns where we know this drug treats this disease. Train you on that. Now look in the rest of the graph and tell us how close all the other relationships are to the ones that we know work. Wow. And so you end up getting a score from 0 to 1 from what the algorithm says. Actually, thalidomide for Friedreich's ataxia has a 0.01 score. It's not good. But propranolol has a 0.9 score for Friedreich's ataxia. And it's because of some intermediary mechanism. Or maybe it's because there's a disease like Friedreich's ataxia and the drug works for that disease. But it's really all about these connections. Wow. And so it's giving us a score for every drug versus every disease. And so there's about 3,000 approved drugs and there's 20,000 human diseases. So that means there's 60 million possibilities. And we use this algorithm to come up with a score for every one of those possibilities. How likely is every drug to be able to treat every disease?
My goodness. This is jaw-dropping. And you're already up and running.
We're already up and running. We ran the algorithm for the first time in March. It took 3 months to run it the first time we ran it. So it completed in March. We started in January. Now we're down to... Our second run was about 8 days, and more recently, it's more like a day to run it. So that just sort of highlights, like, we're on this moment in time where things are moving so rapidly that analyses that used to take 3 months are now taking days. So yeah, we started running it, and we were super excited about the first set of results we got back in March. In fact, I lost my mind. I was so excited at the first set of results because so of course we looked at Castleman's. Obviously that's the area that we know the best, but we could look at every disease and every drug. We have all 60 million scores from this version 1. But of course we looked at Castleman's, an area we know well, and we look at it actually, just to set the stage, it was actually my birthday about a year ago. And so we're all in the conference room, and I look up at the screen, Castleman's scores, from 1 to 3,000. You just get a score for every drug against Castleman's. And the number one drug up there is a drug that's never been used before for Castleman's. It's a TNF inhibitor called adalimumab. And my jaw dropped to the ground And the reason being is that just a couple months before, we had used adalimumab for the first time ever in Castleman's to treat a patient based on a completely separate study that used proteomics data, and we applied AI to proteomics data, but it wasn't this all versus all approach. It was just a targeted Castleman study, and it saved this patient's life. His name's Al, and it saved his life using this drug that hadn't been used before. Wow. And now here we are with this algorithm that had no idea that we just treated Al. I mean, that data wasn't included in the algorithm. And that was the number 1 drug.
Wow.
And what was really cool was the number 3 drug also hits the same pathway, TNF. And so it's like there was clearly something that this algorithm was picking up that took, simple-minded people like me years to figure out. Like, I studied Castleman's for 10 years before I think that TNF could be helpful. This algorithm gets created, and within days, it's already picking out TNF. And so this is, for me, like my jaw just fell to the ground. I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
Yeah, I want to go back just a minute. You said simple-minded like myself.
Yes.
And I just want to clarify because right. No, that makes sense, but here I am thinking, oh, we're going to use, a diabetes drug for cancer because now we can figure out it might be good for a different issue. And how do you do that is one question I have. And in my brain, all I can think about, and I'm not lying, all I can think about right now is how one day, a long time ago, somebody discovered that Taco Bell hot sauce was really good for cleaning pennies. And that, to me, is simple-mindedness. You just accidentally discover Coca-Cola is good for deteriorating rust or whatever it might be, right? So I would say you are not on a simple-minded level. No offense.
Well, it did take me 10 years to figure this out. No, I love that. Yes. No, I mean, that's exactly the example, right? It's like Coca-Cola was not made for cleaning rust, but it cleans rust. Just like that diabetes pill was not made for pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
But if it treats pancreatic cancer, let's go, right? And the problem in our system is that when drug companies pick 1 or 2 diseases to pursue, they often are very intentional about it. It's the opportunities to potentially be the most commercially profitable and the areas where they think are most likely to be helpful. And they oftentimes have like dozens of other diseases that they thought of, but they don't pursue. And from my perspective, I mean, the 3 of us, we get it, right? Like, wait, you're telling me that Coca-Cola could like take the rust off and the rust is like killing me? Like, let's get the Coca-Cola out. Yeah. Let's get the Coca-Cola out, right? And that's where like all of us, we get this, right? It's like, I don't care what it was made for. I don't care whether Coca-Cola was made as a drink or what. But like, let's get the rust off. And I think that's what we got to do.
What barriers do you think you or we, the world in general, are up against for approvals and regulatory issues? I imagine, a diabetes drug gets approval to treat diabetes. How do you then get it repurposed for other things?
Great question. So, right now in our system, you need the drug company that made the drug in the first place to actually submit the data to the FDA for the new thing. And now 80% of drugs are generic, which means the drug companies are no longer interested in those drugs because once a drug becomes generic, now there's a bunch of manufacturers, and that original drug company, they lose all interest in the drug. So in our current system, you need people who don't really care anymore about their old drug to be the ones to submit the data to the FDA, which just doesn't happen, right? Like, if you're a company and you've moved on to something else, you're not going to spend what could be millions of dollars to submit something else for something that's not going to be profitable, right? So the system's really broken from that perspective. The reason that this works and the reason that like I got sirolimus 10 years ago is that in our system, doctors are allowed to prescribe drugs for anything that they want to prescribe it for. So like you can decide to prescribe that diabetes drug for a brain tumor if you as a doctor think that it could treat a brain tumor. You can literally prescribe anything for anything you want. The only restriction is whether the insurance company is going to pay for it and whether you're willing to take on the liability that, like, if that diabetes drug doesn't treat the brain tumor, that they're not going to sue you and be like, why'd you give me a diabetes drug instead of, something for my brain tumor? And so we had this like incredible opportunity, which is to say that like, if we can figure out that diabetes drug could treat the brain tumor, We have really good rationale, and all those connections in the knowledge graph are like really strong. And even though no one had ever thought to use that diabetes drug for a brain tumor, like you look at this network and you're like, wow, there's like so many levels of evidence that point to it. You can imagine that a doctor could prescribe it and maybe it could help that patient. You could track it. And or we as a nonprofit just say, we got to do a clinical trial of that diabetes drug in brain tumors. Like, let's go work with the federal government. Let's work with philanthropic organizations. Let's work with whoever wants to work with us to go just do a trial and prove whether it works or not. And if it works, I can promise you a lot of doctors will start prescribing that for brain tumors, right?
Sure.
But you have to prove that it works. So you either need to, treat a first patient, like in my case, I was the first patient to receive sirolimus, and then things started changing because I responded so well, and then other people started responding well. Or you need to go the route of clinical trials. But for many of these opportunities, you're actually never going to be able to change the label with the FDA because, again, you need the original drug company to actually be the ones to submit the data.
Do you think there's potential that drugs that come to market now would just submit that data for the benefit of an organization like EveryCure, or is that just unheard of?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think you're right. If the drug is on the market now and it's still under patent protection, so like that drug company is still making a profit off the drug, I could see a scenario where we go to that drug company and we say, we really think your drug could be useful for this other disease. And they could say, you know what, that sounds great. Let's do this either together or we'll do it on our own. We're a drug company. Like, we'll figure it out on our own. And that would be great. I would love that. I mean, that would be really, really cool. The only reason we haven't focused on that as much is because it's just kind of a little bit more out of our control, right?
Sure.
Whether the drug company will find it interesting enough. So we've been thinking a lot more about like the old generic drugs that are inexpensive, widely accessible, the safety profile of them, to think about their new uses. But no, I love your point. And at the end of the day, like, we called ourselves EveryCure, which again, like EveryCure is like so ambitious and bold, but we call it that because we really want every drug to be used for every disease possible.
Is EveryCure a nonprofit organization partly to address being able to be independent and get around some of those rules and guidelines and whatever that we have to go through?
Exactly. So we decided to be a nonprofit for a few reasons. So one of the reasons is that it's the cheap, inexpensive drugs for the rare, non-profitable diseases that are getting neglected. Right? Like if you're a small disease and you're an inexpensive drug, that's not a good combo for a drug company, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Drug companies might develop a drug for your disease if they can charge a lot for it, or they might develop a drug for a disease that's really common. But if it's a cheap drug and it's a rare disease, the math doesn't add up very well. And so as a nonprofit, we can go there. And in my opinion, that's the areas that we should want to go to as a society, right? The cheap drugs for the rare diseases or where you can make immediate impact, the safety profile of the drug, you're not going to cost the healthcare system a ton of money. And so we wanted to be a nonprofit so we could go there, where no one else is going. And then we also want to be a nonprofit, to your point, that we can push forward drugs to be used in off-label ways that we couldn't do for a company. So companies, it's illegal to promote off-label use if you're going to financially benefit from it. But we're not financially benefiting from anything. We're a nonprofit. No one's making any profits here. So we can push forward sirolimus for Castleman's, for example, because we're not going to benefit from it financially.
Talk a little bit about the development of EveryCure as an organization. It sounds like you guys are doing incredible work that's taking off like crazy right now. I looked on your website. I got an email and it said, we're looking for the smartest people who want to make a difference in the world.
How did he get that email?
It didn't say they were looking for me, but I just thought But I'm just saying, how do you approach going after that? You guys have such an ambitious goal. I don't know. I guess for those out there who might be wanting to find purpose with a huge swing that's going to make a big difference, I don't know. Just talk about the development of the organization.
Absolutely. So, you're so right. You have to build an incredible team to take on like a big issue like we're taking on. And it is really a big swing. We're swinging for the fences with this. And so you need to have the A team, right? And with that, you need to be able to show your vision for the future, what you're working towards. You need to be able to demonstrate that there's a culture that's going to be exciting to be a part of. And then you need to somehow persuade, really smart people who are doing a lot of other really cool things that this is the coolest thing and the best way to use their really smart brains. And it's not easy, but I will say it's been so exciting and also I'd say touching to me and special over the last few months because we've had such an outpouring of support. I mean, Kyle, we posted these jobs, I think it was end of September, like September 25th. We've received over 4,000 applications for 10 jobs.
Holy cow.
The outpouring it's incredible from every sector. I mean, we have probably 2,000 of those are from people in the pharmaceutical biotech industry. And so you think to yourself, okay, we're a nonprofit. Who from biotech and pharma wants to work for a nonprofit and make like half the salary they used to? Well, a lot of people actually do. I mean, that's like really cool. Like for me, like that's why it's like so touching. It's like, it's basically like we said, like, we started like, sounding the alarm, like we're doing this really cool thing. We started telling everyone, reaching out, and like you might get crickets, and everyone's like, oh, do your own little nonprofit thing, all that stuff. Good luck, right? But the opposite happened. It was like all these people who are making great salaries, doing great things, are deciding they want to make a not as great salary, doing what I think is even greater things. But who knows? Right. And they were really wanting to make that bet, and that has been really special. And we've had some amazing people we've interviewed. We've filled a little bit over half of our first set of slots. We're up to a team of 11 right now. We'll probably be up to 20 in the next couple of months. And so we're growing rapidly. But yeah, we're being really intentional with each of our hires and making sure that we really do try to bring on the A team.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned, the balance between like salary or like, societal gains and then like fulfillment and purpose. Yes. And like, is that not the ultimate debate, right? At some level, that's what we're all trying to figure out, that balance, where we fit. And I just love that you guys are seeing that people aren't driven necessarily by just salary, but by fulfillment and purpose and doing something really great with the time they have on this earth.
You're right. And they're sort of like, walking the talk, right? Because a lot of people can say that they would do that, but when you're actually applying for a job and you're doing interviews, you're walking that talk, right? You're like, you're really doing what you're saying you're going to do. Yeah. I totally agree. It's been awesome.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It reminds me of one of the principles in your book that I think of often, and we talked to Rob Long about this because he has a similar story. You guys are on overtime, and you always say that, and I think of it, man, I'm getting chilled right now, but, I think of it for myself, for everybody. If we can live like that, like every day is a gift that we may not have had if there was other circumstances, then, we can make a bigger impact, I think. And I don't know, it's just incredible the way you live and translate that into other people and have people join the team. So awesome.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Well, I think the world of you. So of course, talking about Rob Long, what an awesome event this past weekend.
Oh my gosh.
At Lincoln Financial. And of course, I couldn't help myself when I announced the Fugitive Taxi. I had to call you out. Sorry, I just can't help myself. I'm like, Fugitive Taxi Research Alliance, I got to call out Kyle Bryant. He's just the best. And I had to.
So, and then also, while we're on that subject of the Young Investigator draft, you were drafted in the Young Investigator draft a few years ago, right?
I was, although there's a bit of a funny story to that. So I was part of the inaugural class in 2018, and I was so honored to receive it. And our first child, Amelia, wasn't due for a few more weeks. And so I was like, you know what, we're going to go to the draft. It'll be sort of my last event before my first child's born. It's going to be awesome. And then like the morning of the draft, my wife, Caitlin, sort of looks at me. She's like, I think Amelia's gonna come. Is coming today. I think she's coming a couple weeks ago. I was like,
Wow.
no, she can't come today. We've got this special event to go to, and of course, Amelia, she's my girl, and she showed up that day, and so of course, I didn't go to the Young Investigator draft, and Amelia was born 2 weeks early, and I think that it was kind of like a funny, in my opinion, my sense is that it was like this sort of indirect message that my little girl Amelia is telling me, which is like, you know what, Dad, you've got a lot of things that you've got to do, but you know what? When I show up, I'm your girl, and you might have all those plans, like events and things you're doing, but hey, I'm your girl, and you got to stop things for me. And so that's how Amelia arrived. It was actually the day of the Young Investigator draft in 2018.
That's incredible. She's helping you create priorities in your life.
That's right.
Especially in the rare disease world, a lot of people know you from the Castleman Disease Collaboration Network. A lot of people know you at Penn State. A lot of people know you as an author. You're all over the place. What is your day job?
Yeah, I've got a few day jobs. So my main day job is here where I run a center at the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. I've got an amazing almost 20-member lab where we do everything from working with animal models through proteomics, genomics, and human clinical trials of Castleman's and related diseases. We're called the CASTLE, which is the Center for Cytokine Storm Treatment and Laboratory. We made our acronym the CASTLE. And here in the CASTLE, like I said, we've got about 20 people, and we do what I think to be some really cool immunology work in our center, in our lab. So that's like my main day job. And then I'm also the president of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, which I'm no longer the executive director. So we have an amazing executive director, Mary Zaccato. But I'm president, which means that I get to work with Mary and the board to focus on the direction of the organization and how we achieve our mission of helping patients with Castleman's all over the world. And then my third day job is that I'm the president of EveryCure, this nonprofit we were talking about that is unlocking new uses for existing medicines. And it used to be that like Penn was my day job and the other ones were like my nights and weekends, but like I'm basically just sort of all in on all three of these. Yeah. And you can imagine that actually is tough to balance, right? Because we all actually have the same amount of time every day, no matter how much we want to, squeeze extra time out of the day. So it's really busy these days. Thankfully, I have an amazing team here at Penn. Like I said, almost 20 people. EveryCure, we're up to 11 full-time employees. CDCM, we've got a handful of folks. So that's the other thing is that we're able to achieve what we're able to achieve because of this amazing team that we build, because of the teams that we have. And so, if someone sees me at the Young Investigator draft, they don't see the 35 other people who I'm working with every day, across these three orgs, to make the really incredible impact they're able to.
I think that's an incredible principle to bring this conversation to a close, if we'd like. You make a fantastic point. Whether you're talking rare disease or something else, nobody is meant to go through life alone or to figure it out on their own. So not only for EveryCure and CDC and Friedreich's ataxia and whatever else is going on, community is something we all need in order to make any of our efforts matter and to have the impact that we hope to have. So I'm glad you shared that principle.
I love it. Yeah. And I think that you can achieve more, right? Like together we can do so much more than we can do on our own. B, it's more fun to do it together, right? Like it's like fun when we're doing things together than when we're sort of doing it on our own. And I think that the people you're working with, you're potentially able to give them the opportunity, like Kyle was talking about earlier, to really have purpose in their lives, right? I mean, I think about the people who have gotten involved in Friedreich's ataxia research over the years and in Castleman's over the years. They don't have a loved one with Castleman's or Friedreich's ataxia necessarily. They just really care about it because they believe that these diseases need to get cured. And so it's this sort of like nice balance where it's like, they're doing it because they want to make a difference in the world, and you want to work with them. So anyway, I think that you're exactly right. I think there's a lot of reasons that doing this together is just so much better, so much more fun, and so much more fulfilling than doing this kind of stuff alone.
Yeah. Well, We really see you as someone who wants to make a big impact with your time in the world, and we're grateful to be along the journey a little bit with you. We love what you're doing, so good luck with EveryCure and your whole team. We're so proud of you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks so much, Kyle and Sean. I love spending time with you. It's always so energizing to be on these podcasts with you, to see you in real life, and I can't wait to listen to it. But thanks so much for all the support. And for anyone listening that's interested in checking out more about EveryCure, it's everycure.org. You can check out cdcn.org to learn more about our councilmans, and you can go to chasingmycure.com to follow all the stuff that we're doing.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And we'll put all those links on our website. Thank you so much for joining us. Sean, talk about huge potential impact. I think that's something that we all want to have with our time on this earth. And David really sees his time as a gift. Like I said in the interview, I just think it's incredible that he's using it for such a huge thing.
It's amazing to see when anybody puts their talents to work for the sake of other people. So I love seeing and hearing all about what David is doing. You know, I gotta say, when you introduced the interview, you said one of our friends, which is fair. David's a great guy and a friend. But I will say, I feel like for the rare disease community, he's everybody's friend.
Yeah, totally.
Everybody knows David, and David knows everybody. So, David, thank you for carving out time and joining the Two Disabled Dudes.
Sean, both you and I are familiar with the power of gratitude, and we like to show it at the end of each episode. Who do you have to thank today?
Today, my thank you note is going to a complete stranger. I couldn't even pick him out of a crowd right now. I saw him briefly, but as some people know, I went on a cruise a few weeks ago. It's my favorite vacation. When I cruise, I use my wheelchair, a manual chair, and it just makes life easier. So at one point on the ship, I'm trying to get through a crowded area. An older gentleman, who I assume is probably a veteran, saw that, it was going to be tough to get through the crowd. So he was like, hey, do you need help? And I'm like, no, it's fine. I just, it's going to take me a second. Well, okay, I'll help with the crowd then. He literally turns and yells, make a hole! like he was, planting a bomb or something. In combat, of just everything about it. He was like, move out of the way, make a hole. And it was just great because it got everybody's attention, and literally everybody stepped to the side, and I got through the crowd with no problem.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
I appreciate people like that, just observing and paying attention and acknowledging that things that, wouldn't bother most does create a challenge for somebody in a wheelchair or with a disability. So, thank you. Make a whole stranger.
Well, Sean, my thank you note also goes out to somebody I don't know. I was at the gas station, and usually I park like on the end to get gas so I can put my ramp out and go out really easily, right? And there's no one right next to me. Well, that spot was taken. And so I pulled into one of the gas pumps on like the interior of the row gas pumps. So there was no one at the spot right next to me at the time. So sweet. I clicked the button, and as the ramp is going out, somebody pulls up. And I'm like, oh, shoot, this is going to be a problem. But he rolls his window down, and he leans over and goes, hey, do you need a little more room? Yeah, that would be nice. So he pulls around and just goes to another pump, like not a huge gesture, but like I guarantee there are people who wouldn't have recognized the need, right, and just park there anyway. So it was just a nice thing that I noticed, and so thank you to gas station Jeep guy.
Nice. I love that. And you make a good point. Most people wouldn't even recognize an opportunity to help in that fashion. Of course, thank you to David for being a part of our show and joining us in the rare disease world and community. We're grateful for people like David. If you like what you're hearing, we'd love for you to subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can visit our show notes at twodisableddudes.com and find links to things that we talked about today, especially links to some of the work that David Fajgenbaum is doing. We look forward to talking with you again next week. Until then, keep living with urgency.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to stay connected.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player.